Okay, this last one's a little bit tricky, the steamboat problem here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to write down some important information on the side as I read through it. So Mark Twain sat on the deck of a reverse steamboat. As the paddle wheel turned, a point on the paddle blade moved so that its distance d in feet from the water surface was a sine function of time, t in seconds. When Twain's stopwatch read 4 seconds, the point was at its highest, which was 16 feet above the water surface. So right now, I want to write down that the max is 16 feet. Okay? And I know that that is starting at 4 seconds. And if we're talking about starting at a maximum, I do want to note that that would be cosine that starts at a maximum. Now this could mean sine or cosine, so don't let that confuse you. It just means a periodic curve. Next part, the wheel's diameter was 18 feet. Okay? And so I know that the minimum then, what I want to do is I want to take the max and subtract the diameter. So 16 minus 18 gives me -2 for the minimum. Okay? And it completed a revolution every 10 seconds. Okay? And so completing the revolution every 10 seconds tells me that the period is 10 seconds. Okay? Which means I also know the frequency, because 2 pi divided by the frequency is 10. I cross multiply, I get 10b is equal to 2 pi. I divide both sides by 10, and so my frequency is pi over 5. And if I'm graphing, I would find the interval, so let's see what's happening first. All right, so let's sketch the graph. So we do have to graph, so we will want to know the interval. And actually, I don't want to put that right in the middle until I know if there's any kind of vertical shift, which there will be. So interval, pi over 5 divided by 4 over times 1/4 gives me pi over, I'm sorry, that's wrong. It's the period divided by 4. And so that is 10 over 4, which is 5/2 or 2.5. Okay, so midline is my vertical shift. So my midline is to find the average of the maximum and the minimum. So I have 16 plus -2. I divide that by 2, and I get, let's see, 14 over 2 is 7 for my midline. Okay, and so then I also know my amplitude. And so my amplitude would be to have my maximum minus my midline. And so we get an amplitude of 9. Now, personally, I like to write an equation before I graph it, so I'm going to just do part C, f of t equals. All right, I'm going to start with my amplitude. I said I was calling this a cosine curve because we talked about it starting at a maximum. All right, and then I've got my frequency, which is pi over 5. My horizontal shift, so it's starting at 4 seconds, which means it's shifting to the right, so I'm going to put a -4. Okay, close both sets of parentheses and then add on my midline. So having that helps me to graph it. So I'm looking at the fact that my maximum is 16 and my minimum is -2, and I'm going to draw my curve, something set up like this. All right, so I'm going to go, I'm just going to mark it -5 and then 5, 10, 15, so kind of sketching it out. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the x-axis. I'm just going to go 1, 2, 3, 4. Bigger line for 5 so I can pick it out. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Bigger line. 11, 12, 13, 14. Bigger line for 15. Okay, so the next step from here is to actually graph it. So our midline is 7. So that's somewhere around here. Okay, so we know our maximum is 16 feet. It starts at 4 seconds. And so I'm going to put my max here. Okay, I'm going to draw in my midline because it'll help me figure things out. Because then the intervals are 2.5. So 2.5 seconds after 4 is 6.5. And so I'm going to put a 0. And then I'm going to a minimum next, which was -2. So it's going to be somewhere down here. And I'm going 2.5 seconds after 6.5, which brings me to 9. Then I'm going back to 0, 2.5 seconds after that. So 2.5 seconds after 9 is 11.5. and then back to a maximum for one full cycle, 2.5 seconds after 11.5, which is going to give me 14. So think about that, from 4 to 14 is one full cycle. Well, that makes sense because they told us that the period was 10 seconds. And there's my really ugly sketch. All right, so what is the lowest point, or what is the lowest the point goes? And we know that it's -2. We already figured that out because we did the maximum, 16 feet minus diameter. Okay, why is it reasonable for it to go negative? Well, if you think about a boat, a paddle boat specifically, you have to have the paddle in the water, otherwise it cannot propel itself. All right, so once we get all this done, we're done with the hardest part. The next step is for us to kind of start plugging in. So how far above the surface was the point when Mark's watch read 17 seconds? And so we actually just want to take that equation and evaluate f of 17. 9 cosine parentheses pi over 5, another parentheses, 17 minus 4, close both, plus 7. Go to your calculator, it's a trig graph, so remember, please, you are always in radian mode. And we're going to type that in. 9 cosine pi over 5, parentheses, 17 minus 4, close both parentheses, plus 7. Doesn't say where to round to, so let's round that to 4.22 feet. Okay, and that again is all just coming from typing into my calculator. Then I want to know what is the first positive value of t at which the point was at the water's surface. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to solve that equation for 0. Okay, now I can do 9 cosine pi over 5, and then t minus 4, close both parentheses, plus 7, and solve it like a normal equation. And so I would subtract 7 from both sides, and so on. So let's do that. Let's ignore this bonus here, because we're not doing that anyway. So we have -7 equals 9 cosine pi over 5, t minus 4. Divide both sides by 9. Basically, it's like cosines are variable. And I'm just going to leave that as -7/9. Okay. And so then I go through and I have to do the inverse cosine in order to undo cosine here and solve that. And so I'm going to go into my calculator. I'm going to do inverse cosine -7/9. Now remember, I'm in radian mode. And what did I mess up on? Negative, not minus. And I get this value, I'm not rounding it, 2.4619 and so on. Equals pi over 5, t minus 4. Right? I'll multiply both sides by 5 over pi to cancel this out. So I'm going into my calculator and just doing times 5 over 5. Okay, again, I'm not rounding yet, 3.918. And then I'm going to add 4 to both sides. And I get t is about 7.92. Okay, now if I look at that, look at the question. It was the first positive value of t at which the point is coming out of the surface of the water. Okay. So if you look at 7.92, we've got almost 8, right? So my drawing wasn't that great. And so that's where it's kind of dipping back down. Okay? And oh no, going in, so that's perfect. There we go. And rest assured that it's not going to be quite this bad on your test tomorrow. But do make sure you're studying this and the other review packet.